So glad that you're with us this morning. This is a good way to start a Monday, talking about our children and how trauma may have impacted them. I'm Julie Beem, and I'm the executive director of the Attachment and Trauma Network, and I am co-presenting today with Ginger Healy, who's the head of our parent program. Housekeeping details, you'll be muted in our presentations today until the question and answers at the end, and then Lorraine will be turning on your ability to grab your mics and to grab your cameras too if you want to ask questions. Meanwhile, if you want to ask questions in the chat box, there's two ways to do that. You can do it out on the Pathable app if you're watching us in a little square on the Pathable app. If you're watching us as a Zoom presentation, you can chat in the Zoom box too. Lorraine is just that good technology wise. She can get your she can get your message regardless of which one of those places you put it in.
Wow. Pressure's on.
So, because we do want this to be interactive. So if we lose you in the middle of this presentation, make sure you give us the high sign. And if not, we can hold those questions till the end, right? So anything else I'm supposed to be telling folks? There will be, this presentation doesn't have it yet. There'll be some files that are able to be downloaded when you come back into the platform to access recordings, and the recordings will post as quickly as we can, which is likely to be the end of the day or first thing tomorrow before you see the presentations from today. It does take us a little bit to get those back up, but they should be in the platform, day by day. As well. So I think that's it. Let's get rolling, shall we?
Sounds good.
All righty. Figure out where to click. Here we go. Like I said, I'm Julie Beem. I'm the executive director of the Attachment and Trauma Network. I've been in this role since 2009. The Attachment and Trauma Network is 26, almost 27 years old. Wow, older than some of our children. And it was founded by a group of moms in Kansas City, Missouri, whose children had been impacted by trauma and had been diagnosed with attachment disorders and oppositional defiant disorders and a variety of things. But 27 years ago, the science wasn't with us yet that attachment disorders are trauma-based. Now we know so much more about development, about child development, about the neurological development of children who have had significant adversities, to understand much more about attachment disorders. So this group of moms, at the suggestion of their therapist, banded together to support each other and to start educating each other. And pretty soon, because parents are a pretty powerful force, they started getting phone calls and mail, and eventually email, because this was like the early 90s, from all over the country. And so they started trying to support as many families as possible. And when my family adopted our youngest from China in 1999, because we were experienced parents, were pretty quick to realize something was happening. It took us several years to figure out what, but in that process, I found the Attachment and Trauma Network and their folks for support, and then turned around and started volunteering back to that. We've provided a variety of resources throughout the years, mostly to caregivers and families, until around 2013, 2014, when several of our members who were educators said, you know what, all the strategies that we're learning and all of the ideas that are here work really well in our schools. And they started telling stories about how they were making a difference in their schools, in their various roles. So we pulled that team together and we started talking to other groups that were doing trauma-informed education across the country. In 2014, we held a summit, and a few years later started having our Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference, which is a very large conference that we have every February over President's Day weekend, focused on helping educators in the trauma-informed schools movement. So today, all of that is long-winded to say that today and this conference, the Standing Strong Conference, is going to be focused on parents and caregivers. And we realize that parents and caregivers look at things through a different lens than educators. But we also believe that we need to be armed with the information about our children and the impact to their development that trauma can have, and what they need in school to be successful. So we're really happy to be able to do that for you throughout the next couple of days. Ginger, tell them a little bit about you.
I'm Ginger Healy. I'm the Parent Program Director at ATN, and I come to this work professionally as a social worker. I've been in the international adoption field for over 15 years, and as a trauma therapist in the school and in the hospitals. And then personally, we adopted our son from Romania back in 2003. And so that's really what kind of brings me here today, not only my professional work, but really, truly, it's my personal work that has brought me here. And I also have another son with autism and special needs. And so working with the schools has been, a challenge and a beautiful collaboration all rolled into one. And so this conference is really exciting to me. So I think we should just go ahead and dive in. Julie, take it away.
I agree. Okay. So our children have stories, and this slide used to say that our children come to us with stories, but I'm totally aware that there are parents with us today, and there are parents that are going to be watching the recording, and parents that we work with more frequently now than ever before, whose children have lived with us since they were born. There are biological children is the term that adoptive families use. But the point is that we used to believe a long time ago that babies especially were not impacted by the negative things that happened in their environments around them, that they were able to not absorb that in any way, shape, or form. The neuroscience around development of children's brains tells us something very different. And our children's stories include the loss, the grief, the complex family relationships, the cultural differences, the trauma that they have experienced or that they have seen others around them experience. We're not going to talk in any depth today about something called the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. But if you're not familiar with that, please go Google that, ACEs, ACES, and read the epidemiology study about what adversities can do to our physiology, to our neurology, to our emotions, to our development. It's quite informative. And the point is that our children they are being impacted by this, even if they don't have the ability to tell us about that impact in the ways that we understand it. So that's the point of this slide. We're going to roll on to talking about trauma.
I think a lot of people understand that something like a plane crash or a tornado or a horrible car accident is traumatic. Yes, absolutely it is. But for our purposes, we really want to focus on chronic, complex, pervasive trauma that happens at an early age, those adverse childhood experiences that Julie mentioned, and the attachment difficulties that kind of result from that. So let's look at this definition from Dr. Bruce Perry: a psychologically distressing event that's outside the range of usual human experience involving that fear, terror, and helplessness. The important thing for us to know here is that trauma is an experience. It's in how the person experiences and perceives what's happened, not the actual event itself. And that's an important concept, because what is traumatic to one may not be traumatic to another. It really depends on a lot of things. So that experience or pattern of experiences that impairs that functioning and making that system really reactive and sensitive, that's what we see in our children. Dr. Perry talks about it really depends on the experience and what is perceived to has happened, not the actual event itself. So I kind of want you to sit with that a little bit, the event, the experience, and the effect, because we do know that adverse childhood experiences are actually quite common. But the good news is that they can be healed through relationship. We're going to talk about that because we want to know how to heal this trauma, right? And that's where we kind of dive into resilience. Resilience is the ability to overcome hardships. It's how we navigate successfully through changing environments. I like to talk about it in the form of springing forward, because what's really crucial here is that we're not born resilient. It's not something that we automatically have. Babies come into this world completely dependent on those caregivers. And so we, as those caregivers, have to teach that and help them build that. I want you to kind of imagine a teeter-totter or a fulcrum. And on the one side are those negative things, those adverse experiences. And so the goal is to pile on all those good things onto the other side to kind of balance out and shift the weight of that fulcrum. And that's where we talk about security, safety, those protective relationships. The more we pile that on, that's how we shift the weight of that fulcrum. And over time, those cumulative impacts of the positive experience will give more coping skills. Things will get easier and better. And we become stronger and rewire the brain that way. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But the big punchline here that we want you all to know, and we hear this from Dr. Schoenkoff from the Harvard Center for the Developing Child, is that the single most common factor for children who develop resilience is at least one stable, committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or another adult. And I want you to know that when I use the word parent throughout this slide, I'm talking about caregiver. I'm talking about foster parent, grandparent. I'm even talking about teacher, anyone who is supportive, giving care, who is trusted and stable and committed. Those are all such important relationships. So you may be wondering, what does resilience have to do with attachment? Because we, as the Attachment and Trauma Network, believe so much in the importance of attachment that it's in our name. So trauma does make us really nervous and wary of other people, but our neurobiology really needs people to feel safe. And so I want you to think about these babies being born and being completely dependent, completely helpless, and needing caregiving to survive. Dr. Vanderkolk says the most important significant determinants of resilience is the quality of those close personal relationships. So this early attachment is really crucial in how we adapt as humans. How loved you felt as a child is actually a great predictor of how you manage all these difficult situations that come in our life. And so good enough parenting equals secure attachment, and then attachment equals resilience. So let's look at this cycle, this attachment cycle. The baby has a need, and when a baby has a need, what do? They express the need, they cry. And then the caregiver comes and meets that need. And then trust develops. And that happens over and over and over again, a zillion times in a day. All of us know that who have cared for an infant, right? And that cycle really teaches, that repetition of that cycle is what really kind of teaches the baby that if I need something, someone's going to be there. They're going to come alongside me and believe in me and help me get what I need. And that means I am safe. And if I'm scared, someone's going to have my best interest at heart. That's that healthy attachment cycle. And that's, of course, what we want for every infant and every child. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And we all know that because we're here today. And these children that are entrusted in our care have not had always that healthy attachment cycle. So if that caregiver shows up sporadically, is neglectful, if there's danger, a lack of food, any, traumatizing situation you can think of, then when the
Medical conditions, unmitigated
yes,
pain, anything that happens to the child, even if it isn't the parent
that's
doing
right.
those things. Yeah.
That's right. This does not at all mean, it's just mean that for whatever reason, a need has not been met for whatever reason. And so when that happens, then mistrust develops. And because of that, the child's self-view and worldview become very skewed, and they become at risk for all kinds of challenges emotionally, mentally, and physically. And that's even when a child doesn't remember. Even at 1 day, 1 month, 1 year of age, they may not remember, but that doesn't mean it has not impacted them. So understanding how that brain development and trauma impacts us is the key to understanding the depth of harm that has happened to our children because of grief, loss, abandonment, medical needs, anything that has happened. But what I kind of want you to look at is what it does. It teaches these children that the world is actually not safe. It could be scary. It's very unpredictable. This will start to make sense when you look at your children's unpredictable behaviors. It's because they don't necessarily know what is going to happen next, and they don't trust adults. But what is really, really sad is that they start to feel that they don't matter, that they are worthless, and that they really can't depend on anyone. So what I want you to come away with knowing is how important attachment is, and that attachment truly is the antidote to trauma. Building these kids' resilience really helps. Promoting healthy attachment for all children is the key to getting to that higher level of emotional health. And it comes from consistent, compassionate caregiving. And that's, like I said, where we meet those needs over and over and over. And then their nervous system gets calm, and that's how we teach regulation. Our calm is contagious, and that healing happens in relationship. And you, as the caregiver, are that catalyst to change. You are the healing agent. It's really important to understand what's going on in their brains so that you can help them. And that's why we really talk about these neurobiological, physiological things going on underneath. We're going to talk about some brain basics next.
Awesome. So for me as a parent now, 20 years ago, because my daughter is 25, there was so much that I didn't understand about any of this. My other children had been born to me and had not had anything impeding a pretty healthy relationship. So what I didn't know was that they learned how to regulate themselves. They learned how to calm down. They learned how to, how to trust the world through that attachment. And they were taught that just by me doing what I thought was good parenting, right? And nobody tells you that as a rank and file parent out there. But we're telling you that today, that's where that's built. So if your children are not infants and you're now going, oh my gosh, my kid is 5 or 10 or 15, but they still are having trouble with regulating themselves, with impulse control, with all of those things, it's because they didn't learn it. It's all, the good news is that their brains can continue to learn. All of our brains can continue to learn clear throughout our lifespan. So what really did it for me as a parent in terms of being able to understand the magnitude of the impact that trauma had on my daughter's life, and that this really was something that was holding her back. It wasn't because she was a bad kid or I was a bad parent. Was the brain science, and the brain science just continues to pour out in support of what we're talking about today. So the brain science is really important to grasp on a basic level. And I'm not going to make you a neurologist in the next 10 minutes, but I'm going to give you some basic brain tenets that I'm pretty sure if you thought about it, you already kind of knew, but I'm going to point them out to you anyway. And the first is that the brain develops from the bottom up and from the inside out. There's a lot of writers that talk about your upstairs brain and your downstairs brain and your inside brain and your outside brain, and they sometimes give it animals, but basically here it is. Your brain is developing at birth, before birth, at birth, and throughout your throughout its development, which goes to about age 30, folks. They used to think it was earlier, but your brain is still developing. And then, of course, it has the opportunity to change even beyond that. But it goes from the inside out and the bottom up. Children cannot do things that their brains aren't ready for. We get that in a lot of different in a lot of different ways. Like, we're not trying to teach algebra to first graders, and we're not trying to let middle schoolers drive a car. I mean, we understand that on a lot of levels. Where we don't always understand it is in the emotional and social side of things. Our children are not emotionally and socially ready for the next step until they've taken this step. And it doesn't really matter whether chronologically they should be taking that step or not, right? It's the growth from the inside out and from the bottom up. So that's brain basic number one. Brain basic number two, use it or lose it. Our brains, just like the rest of our physical body, get stronger the more you do something, and get weaker the less you do something. In brain science, it's actually called pruning. Our brains prune away connections that we don't use in order to be more efficient, because our brains are really kind of like a supercomputer. They're trying to get to a very efficient way of accessing the information, the emotions, the feelings. And so what you use the most is going to get stronger, and what you don't use, eventually you're going to lose the ability of that. Or definitely it's going to be much harder. Lorraine can attest that it was much harder for all of us to use this online platform today. When we had used it last for the conference in February, we practiced and practiced and practiced through January and February, and we had it down, and we haven't gone back in to try to use it until this last week or so. And then we're like, whoa, we had to relearn it because we had lost that in our brains. But if you use something, especially if you look at our children who have big emotions or big feelings that happen that seem to be way out of balance with the reality of what's happening around them, like they might just, might have a complete meltdown about something that you're like, what is going on there? It could be because their brain has used that emotional pathway up through their limbic system, up through their alarm, which is called the amygdala. And it's just become a really strong reactive way for their brains when they sense any amount of danger, and they just go there faster because they've had to use that over and over again, and they've exercised that to be big. What hasn't gotten exercised is their brain structure, the hippocampus and some of the other structures that are in that midbrain, in that limbic area, that help to damper that, to calm that, to give you a nanosecond to get your cognition to go, did I really step on a snake, or is that a stick, kind of thing. We've all had that feeling, right, where you're walking along and you think you're about to step on something scary, and you get that brain, that sort of cortisol rush through your body, where you're like, oh my gosh, or the near miss car accident or whatever it is. But if the rest of your system is strong enough, then it has a chance to go, wait a minute. So some of our, whatever we use the most, we're going to build stronger. So part of our strategy as parents and teachers is to help children figure out how to use the other brain structures over and over again, just like exercising in the gym till it gets big and strong, right? So brain basic number 3, what fires together wires together. Our brains, because they're trying to be super efficient, they're trying to get this mass cabling together of sequence and of when this happens, this, this is the outcome, or this, our brains are always trying to make sense of that, right? The best example to a group of adults that I can give is that most of the people listening to me know how to drive, right? So if you know how to drive and you've been driving since 16 or 17 years old, and you're now a little older than that, the chances are pretty good that you can do a lot of driving tasks without thinking about it, without using your thinking brain. You back out of the garage on your way to work, and you back down the driveway, and you drive through your neighborhood, and you get on the streets to go to work. And sometimes there's not even a cognitive thought about, oh, I need to turn here. Oh, I need to adjust my mirror. Oh, I need to put my seatbelt on. You might be so in thought about what your workday is that you show up at your office door or your workplace door without really ever have consciously been thinking about the commute. Or maybe you're listening to your favorite podcast, or whatever you're doing. Your brain is doing these other things, but yet your brain knows how to get you in this automobile from point A to point B. How did that happen? It happened because of the repetition. You did it over and over and over again. And there's so many things that we do, they're brushing our teeth. I'm like, there's all kinds of things that we do as adults because we've done it over and over and over again, and it's wired together. And sometimes it's wired together with emotions around it. Sometimes a smell or a song or some other kind of thing will trigger a wiring together of things. This is true for our children, and this is true for any of us who are impacted by early adversities, right? So the children who have had the most adversities, who've had significant early childhood traumas and impacts, the chaos around that, whether it's significant neglect, whether it's lots of medical pain, whatever has brought it to them, is wired into their emotional being. So when we're looking at why do they go from 0 to 60, or when we're looking at why they react a certain way, that it's wired that way. The calm is not wired that way. So we have to kind of untangle that wiring and repeat the what we want the new response to be, if that makes sense. And then, of course, the fourth is the one that I alluded to from the beginning, is that our brains do change their whole lives. When I was in college and taking psychology classes back in the 19 whatevers years ago, they didn't know this, that they actually thought you killed off brain cells as your life went on. And you probably were doomed to not being able to change your brain very much. The truth is that we can. The challenge is that the older your brain gets, the more repetitions are needed to make those changes. Fortunately, for a lot of our children and students that we're talking about today, they're young and their brains are plastic, and there's a lot of really great things that we can pour into them at this juncture. So I love sharing this with you. If you know it already, please just nod along with us. If you don't, this is a quick way to teach ourselves, to teach our children. I've seen it used in schools. It's super powerful. It's making a brain out of your hand. And this is Dr. Dan Siegel, and one of our PD collaborative experts in trauma-informed education, Jen Alexander, actually meeting each other and doing this, because this is Dr. Siegel's hand and brain model. I'm going to stop it for a minute so that Ginger and I get really big, so you can see us as a full, so that we can do this with you. So here's your brain. Here's your brain stem. Here's your what's called your cerebellum, the palm of your hand. This is where all of your things that you never think about, your breathing rate, your heart rate, all of the automatic things that your brain is doing for your body live. This, if you tuck your thumb in, This represents the midbrain or the limbic system that some of you may know about. It's where the amygdala is. It's where the hippocampus is. There's a variety of things here. When you're a baby, when you're first born, all of this, your midbrain, not the hippocampus, it hasn't really come online yet, but definitely your amygdala is online as a newborn infant. And so is this. And these fingers that are going to curl over the top are not so much online. Now, don't get me wrong, your brain looks like this. It's just not working in its full capacity yet as an infant. But here, so there's your wrinkly part that you're used to seeing. And right here where your fingernails are here is right here. And that is your prefrontal cortex. When we talk later today about things like executive functioning, and if if your teens don't have executive functioning, and somebody said that to you in the school meeting, you know that that's part of your prefrontal cortex, and it's part of what makes us uniquely human. So we're walking along like this, our brains, and we start to feel an emotion. Maybe we have a fight with our spouse, maybe that somebody pulls out in front of us in a car, something happens and we start to feel a big feeling, and we feel that in our midbrain, and it causes our thinking brain to start to go offline a little bit, and we have the propensity to flip our lids, right? We've all know what that feels like. In fact, probably sometime in the last week, you flipped your lid in some way. And it might have made you, I know it makes me like a screaming crazy woman sometimes. That's flipping my lid, right? That's what it feels like. We've all had that experience. We also have had times where we're walking along and something happens and we have a big feeling about it and our lid starts to flip, but we recognize it and we do something to pull it back down, right? So that's what we want for ourselves and for our children, is the ability to recognize when our lids are starting to flip and to do something that help us get back to this state of calm, right? So when we teach that, when teachers teach that to children, and Jen Alexander is fantastic at teaching that to elementary children, it gives us a language to talk about it. I mean, our kids can then say, my brain feels kind of like it's here, right? Giving us a cue that they might need help calming themselves down, right? And sometimes when we don't have the ability to exchange words, it's a good hand signal, right? So that we can signal across the room about those kinds of things. So there's a lot of ways that we can use that hand and brain model. So I invite you to think about that a little bit as you're going throughout your day, and read some more about anything that Dr. Dan Siegel writes is awesome along those lines. So, all right.
Yeah, I love that model too, because it just really normalizes that flipping your lid happens and that it's okay and that it's normal and that we can fix it. It takes the shame out of these big, scary behaviors that sometimes can really be embarrassing or be punished or be handled incorrectly. It's how we all get on the same page with.
You bring up a huge point, Ginger, that a lot of times that our children get into a shame spiral on top of, because as they get older, as they get to be 5 or 6 or 7, and especially when the adults in their world point out their misbehaviors, their shame can really get in the way and cause that to be even worse.
Yeah. So, now we know that this trauma really affects what's going on in the brain, and we can talk about now how to recognize the following things, and so that we can parent that whole brain of the child. And the first one is really talking about how we shift the way we look at our children's behaviors, that we understand that when a child is exhibiting a behavior, hitting, kicking, spitting, those are those big fight ones, or running away and hiding, those flee behaviors, or freezing, not being able to answer what's going on, that they're really actually trying to communicate something. And they may not have the ability verbally to tell you what is going on because they're not chronologically or developmentally at the age where they can do that, or not in touch with their emotions. They just don't have the development to say, Mom, here's what's going on and I need help. So it comes out in these behaviors, and then we need to go, whoa, something's going on. What's happening? I like to picture an iceberg. At the top is that really scary, ugly behavior, but we go, let's not focus on this behavior. Let's focus on what's going on underneath that is causing this behavior, because these reactions that these children are having, especially those overreactions, they actually have that neurobiological basis that they cannot control. I want you to remember that flipped lid. And when that lid is flipped, they do not have control. So that's when we have to come in and help them get that lid back down and become back in control. They don't know what's going on. So asking why really doesn't help. It really is important that we become detectives and get curious and look underneath. But one of the most important things we can do is just understand it's not that they won't do what we're asking right now. It's that they truly cannot. Remember, they cannot access all those things in that prefrontal cortex, like language and processing and all memory and multi-step directions. They can't. So if we're asking them to do something and they're not responding, it's not that they're being willfully disobedient or manipulative. I know that we get into those grooves where we think that and they say that and we hear that at school. We all need to shift and understand that they cannot do that. So look beneath the surface and find out what that behavior is communicating. Most of the time, it's fear and it's shame. And if you can kind of get down to that, then you can really make an impact. So something's going on, and these are things that really help us to get through that, because in those big behaviors that come out, it's really hard not to take it personally. Yeah. It's really frustrating. It's a really difficult situation, but we have to take a breath. And a lot of times we have to take a break and get calm ourselves before we can help the child. So try not to take it personally. Just recognize that that's what's going on. Their lid is flipped. So if you can respond therapeutically, and what I mean by that is not that you have to be a therapist. That's the therapist's job and we need them. But therapeutic actually means healing. So if you can respond in a healing manner and be that detective, get ahead of the behavior before it starts to escalate, then you'll actually start to build that pathway and rewire the brain to calm, focus on the relationship and become that healing agent.
Right. So we developed a framework called the PATH framework, promoting attachment and trauma healing. I'm realizing that as we always do, because we have so much we want to share, that we're running really tight on time. So we didn't intend to teach you the framework today, but it is available through ATN, through our store, through our parenting cards, through webinars. But we want to talk to you about the basic tenets really quickly of what's in this framework. We didn't create a curriculum, a parenting curriculum per se, because there are very many good ones out there that all have the same pieces of the framework. So part of what we want to do for you as parents and caregivers is empower you to know what is good therapeutic parenting, what's attachment focused, trauma informed, resilient building strategy, what that looks like, so that you can look at other parenting resources and say, is this a good idea or is this not a good idea based on what I now know about what my child needs in a trauma informed, attachment focused way, right? So we did that by developing these cards that have these animals on them. And it looks like it's for kids, but it's really for us to remind us the points of PATH parenting. So here we go briefly on what those are. The first one is this mama bear, right? And she signifies safety. She signifies the concept that everyone must feel safe. By everyone, we mean everyone in the classroom, everyone in your home, wherever it is. Sometimes it's our children who've been impacted by trauma who aren't feeling safe. Sometimes their behaviors make others not feel safe. So before we do anything at all, we have to make sure that everybody is feeling as safe as possible. So sometimes our children, my daughter was this way. Sometimes her dysregulation was so big and so scary and so potentially dangerous that we had to take moves to get her out of that space, or to get others out of that space, in order for us to be able to do other things that helped her to regulate herself and to calm down and to be able to then come back and have relationship with everybody. So the other piece of feeling safe is that everyone must feel safe. And that means that we all as adults know that we are providing as safe of an environment as we can. We lock our doors at night. We put up the dangerous things. We lock the cabinet that's got poison in it. And in a classroom where, we're safe teachers, we've got safety plans, all of those things. That's making everybody's physical world safe. But everyone must feel safe, and felt safety is something that we need to examine. And just like Ginger was showing with our attachment work, our children are already kind of wired, if they have attachment challenges, to not feel safe. So we have to work on that felt safety.
This is our sheepdog, who kind of reminds us that we need to have boundaries, right? But we also can do it in a really loving way. We have to find that balance between firmness and softness. And we can do that through watching our care around transitions, letting our children know about transitions and keeping them abreast of changes. Because, and Julie will tell a story that about even moving the furniture in the house can really set a child off and fill them full of anxiety. So just be aware of that and talk about those things. And when we can, I know it's not always possible, but keep their world small. In our culture, it's normal for kids to go to camp and scouts and soccer and music lessons. But if we can, it is really best to keep that world small. They're not developmentally able to handle all that interactions, and a lot of times get really overwhelmed and triggered. So we just need to focus as much as we can on the family and the relationships. Yeah. The other thing is direct communication, and that's where you watch your body language and your tone and your volume and your cadence of your voice, because our kids, as we've talked about, have been wired in a way that they take things differently than intended. So sarcasm does not work. It can be really hurtful. Yelling does not work. Nobody calms down by being yelled at to calm down.
Nobody does. Yeah.
So everybody, we have to just be really careful in how we handle things so that they feel safe and feel seen. And then we can work on that security and soothing them after that.
Right.
So,
yeah. And it's hard to present this in this setting, because the structure and nurture balance is really at the crux of what helps our children to start to thrive and start to heal, is figuring out how to draw the boundaries without being mean, right? And still provide the really intense nurture that they need and get that balance. So today is not the day to go into that in depth, but just to plant the seed in your mind that our children really need both. They need us to draw the boundaries, but also really pour on the nurture. So regulation is the horse's are used to signify the regulation because they are such a regulating animal. They, to us as human beings, we use them a lot in therapeutic ways for a lot of different types of therapy, including emotional and folks that have been traumatized. Regulation is the ability to manage your emotions. It's a skill that we learn. Remember, we learned it as infants, most of us, how to calm ourselves. So very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, there's basically 3 steps to helping a child learn to regulate. And it can get really unpacked, but here they are. The first step is that the parent or the adult in the situation has to be calm. Just like Ginger said, screaming calm down to somebody is not going to work. And it's actually probably going to escalate their limbic system, their emotions, because you're escalated. So if you're not calm, helping a child to regulate is not going to happen. So there has to be, you have to have a strategy for how am I going to get calm and stay calm in the middle of whatever this chaos is. And if I can't get calm, how am I going to tap out for somebody else to be calm, right? Step 2 is what's called co-regulation, or helping another person to regulate. And we probably all have done this in some shape or form with our friends on the phone when they're going through a crisis, or with our spouses, or any number of times where we're present for that person, where we reflect back calm to them, even if they're not reflecting calm to us. And we hold space for their feelings, for their big feelings. So in the moment of a child in crisis with a dysregulation, we are not going to try to tell their thinking brain what it should do. We're going to try to get them back to a regulated state so that they have access to their thinking brain, so they can figure out what they're supposed to do, because we recognize that we need to help them regulate through co-regulation. And we do that, and we know this because of a neuroscience knowledge that there's something in our brains called mirror neurons, and we can either catch their dysregulation from them, and that's easily done. And I know if you think about it for a minute, you've caught dysregulation from somebody before. Or we can drive the mirror and say, this is what calm looks like, right? So it's this family here, this dad or grandpa making perfect eye contact with his baby and helping to regulate, versus catching the dysregulation, right? And then the third is to actively teach them the self-regulation tools. And anytime we're working with a child who's a toddler age or beyond, that hasn't had enough good attachment there to have learned regulation that way, we have to really actively teach them how to use tools, and we have to give them a variety of tool options so that they've got some ideas about what can I use to calm down. And because our brains learn in repetition, we have to repeat this lesson over and over and over again. And that's what Dr. Bruce Perry's 6 R's is really all about. And if you study any of his work through the Child Trauma Academy, you'll run into these these R's. That it has to be relational, it has to be relevant, it has to be repetitive, it has to be respectful of the child and the child's culture, it has to be rewarding, has to be rhythmic, music, dance, exercise, all kinds of things, horseback riding, swimming, all kinds of movement type things help you to get calm. And if you wondered why your jog or your walk was helping to create calm, it's because some of these R's are represented there for sure.
Yeah. These are our otters. We love them. If you'll notice them holding your hands, it's called rafting, and they do that so they don't lose each other, especially when the waters get bumpy. And that reminds us that sometimes it is hard to stay connected with our children. The attachment piece is really tricky, but it's crucial. It's important. And there are ways that we can keep holding on to each other and keep diving in. And especially as we think about before we respond, that we have to, and offer suggestion, we call it connecting before we correct. So we have to connect with each other before we can really let them know what, boundary is set next. And that's comes, this PACE model that Dr. Dan Hughes has created really helps us with some of these connective strategies. He encourages us to be playful and bring the fun in, be attuned and present, putting all our distractions away, really tuning into our child's needs. We talked about before being curious, being that detective, looking underneath that iceberg, what's going on underneath, and being empathetic, because we all know that these kids have gone through some stuff. That's what has brought us here today. So that helps us look at these children differently and understand that they're not always in control and they need us as a healing agent. We want them to just feel felt and feel seen. And we can do that with our empathy and accept their feelings without judgment, and then kind of reflect those feelings back to them.
Right. So our last animal is the emperor penguin. He's my favorite. And this is a dad emperor penguin who the mom lays the egg, and then the dad like covers it up with their little pouch on their feet, and literally holds that baby's egg and rotates it in the warmth of his pouch while mom goes off to the ocean she takes a spa vacation after laying that egg, and the dad is who hatches those little babies. But we use him as a reminder of how intentional and purposeful we have to be as the caregivers, as the ones, the one stable caregiver in our children's lives, whether we're the parent or maybe we're the teacher or someone else having a deep relationship with this child. We have to be there. We have to be present. We have to not be on our cell phones. We have to not be distracted. We have to really pay attention to what's going on to our children and have a purpose of that, right? Have a plan and figure out how we ourselves have to stay regulated, which is the other part of this conference, the Standing Strong Conference. We're going to spend a lot today talking about being an advocate, and a lot on Wednesday talking about being an advocate. But tomorrow, and it's very important that you attend tomorrow, we're going to talk about how to fill ourselves up to be able to stay regulated, because that really is the key for us as the adults who are helping children who are dysregulated and who need to build relationship, is for us to be able to do that. And that means we have to get filled up in other ways, and we have to get serious about that for ourselves. So we're running rapidly out of time, but we want to acknowledge that most of us whose children have been impacted by trauma did not expect to be down this path, right? We didn't expect that this was going to be our children's challenge, and it was, and our challenges. And so we have to be ready to adjust our own expectations. We often, when those of us who acquired children who've been traumatized, had big expectations that we were going to do certain things that now our family probably isn't. So much so that we may have imagined ourselves as a soccer mom, and now we're really more like a first responder. And those of us whose children have been traumatized, through the world, and we've been parenting them all along, we have no idea that all of these things were going to be added to our job description, that we're going to have to help them heal, but that we're also going to have to be advocates, like on so many different levels. And that's mainly why you all are here, right? Is to talk about that. We're going to have to learn enough about trauma to really be able to explain that to others in the world, and then to do the trauma work. And if we think about other trauma workers out there, people who are working in healthcare, people who are EMTs, they get training and equipment, and they get a break, and they get a chance to process with somebody therapeutically, counselors and others. They get access to help, which is here on this last little click. And we have to figure out how to make that for ourselves, because this is hard work. What we're talking about doing here is not easy. It's crucial. It's important. It needs to be done, and you can do it, but you're going to need a team of people helping you do this. And you're going to need the schools and the systems and the other folks who provide services to you to be on board with you in that team. So quickly, if you want to know some of the tools and the parenting frameworks and the parenting curriculums and the other interventions and things that we have found to be really, really impactful in a trauma-informed, attachment-focused way, here they are. Ginger is going to take this information and also the information on this slide, which is a lot of reading and webinars and books and good information, and put it into a handout for you to have on this, on the recording of this, so that you can download it. You can also find a lot of this information on our website, as well as how to get to our webinars and parent cards on our website too. So we've rapidly run out of time. Ginger, is it okay if we move forward on questions?
Yeah, I think that's what we ought to do.
Awesome.
And just to let you know, because we are out of time, there's our email. Please reach out to us. We are here for you for ongoing support.